Matthew 26, 57 through 75. Those who had arrested Jesus took him to Caiaphas, the high priest, where the teachers of the law and the elders had assembled. But Peter followed him at a distance, right up to the courtyard of the high priest. He entered and sat down with the guards to see the outcome. The chief priests and the whole Sanhedrin were looking for false evidence against Jesus so that they could put him to death. But they did not find any, though many false witnesses came forward. Finally, 2 came forward and declared, "This fellow said, 'I am able to destroy the temple of God and rebuild it in 3 days.'" Then the high priest stood up and said to Jesus, "Are you not going to answer? What is this testimony that these men are bringing against you?" But Jesus remained silent. The high priest said to him, "I charge you under oath by the living God. Tell us if you are the Messiah, the Son of God." "You have said so," Jesus replied. "But I say to all of you, from now on you will see the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of the Mighty One and coming on the clouds of heaven." Then the high priest tore his clothes and said, "He has spoken blasphemy. Why do we need any more witnesses? Look, now you have heard the blasphemy. What do you think?" "He is worthy of death," they answered. Then they spit in his face and struck him with their fists. Others slapped him and said, "Prophesy to us, Messiah. Who hit you?" Now Peter was sitting out in the courtyard, and a servant girl came to him. "You also were with Jesus of Galilee," she said. But he denied it before them all. "I don't think you know who you're talking about," he said. Then he went out to the gateway, where another servant girl saw him, and said to the people there, "This fellow was with Jesus of Nazareth." He denied it again, with an oath, "I don't know the man." After a little while, those standing there went up to Peter and said, "Surely you are one of them. Your accent gives you away." Then he began to call down curses, and he swore to them, "I don't know the man." Immediately a rooster crowed. Then Peter remembered the word Jesus had spoken, "Before the rooster crows, you will disown me 3 times." And he went outside and wept bitterly.
Did you ever place yourself in some of these stories? Did you ever think about where you might have been standing in the story where Jesus was front and center, quiet, resolute, and the object of everyone's attention? I have. Would you have been standing with the accusers, the religious leaders of the time, the skeptics and questioners, those who were looking for evidence against him, and maybe even some reserved out of fear who were hoping for evidence in his favor? Most of us wouldn't even consider the notion of standing with this lot, except in those times of crisis, suffering, and pain, where the anger, fear, and hurt well up into accusations, questioning, and doubts. "Jesus, why didn't you save my loved one? Why didn't you keep me from being assaulted? Why didn't you stop this whole COVID thing from happening? Tell me, Jesus, are you the Messiah? If so, do something." Or could you see yourself standing in the place of the servant, busy and running around in the religious sector, dressed for the role, focused on serving but missing the show? The one on the stage is only in the back of your mind because you're caught up in your duties. Well, perhaps maybe the servant in this story was a little curious and a little observant. After all, she did question someone about being with Jesus. Or maybe you just wanted to do your duty from a safe distance and not really engage in the scene before you. You just wanted the night to be over because you were exhausted. Who knows? Would that have been you? Surely you wouldn't see yourself with the guards, the religious enforcers of the prevailing beliefs of the system. Would you? Would I? The church guards who were devoted to intimidating in the name of truth? Don't contradict the religious system, or they will respond with force, quite unlike the man in their midst. Maybe you just would have been one of the onlookers, curious, caught up in the excitement, watching, waiting, wondering what was going to happen, and staying warm by the fire. A very safe distance away from anything that might draw attention to you or put you in danger. Make you feel uncomfortable. Probably, most of us would think first of standing in Peter's place, over there by the fire in the outer courtyard. After all, you do know Jesus, and you know Peter. Peter, torn and conflicted and scared to death even though he had just drawn a sword and cut off someone's ear. Brave enough to have followed up until this point, and desperate enough to want to know what Jesus was going to do. Feeling that colossal struggle to do something, but too afraid to face what's in front of you. You're standing there by the fire, frozen in place, awaiting the outcome. Side note, ever ask yourself, what if Peter had spoken up? How would that have changed the story? How would that have changed Peter? But he didn't. And the whole question of where we would have stood almost doesn't play right, because we know the rest of the story. And so did Jesus. And he still knows the rest of the story. But in a way, are we still like Peter? I mean, we can look back and see all that Jesus has done, but we don't know how this current story is going to play out. Are we still wanting to follow, but too unsure, hesitant, or confused to get close to him? Are we still running around in our pseudo serving, not seeing the depth of his suffering in the least of these all around us? Do we find ourselves even in places of accusation now and anger because of our current disappointment, pain, and suffering? Maybe we're still content to sit on the sidelines and watch to see how things turn out. Or are we even responding with aggression and intimidation to those with different perspectives and viewpoints? May I suggest that the best place to be is where none of those in the original story dared to stand. Not looking at him from a distance, but getting right up there next to him. Actually, in him. We do know the rest of the story, and in him is possible for us. Jesus spoke about it in his high priestly prayer in John 17 on that very night. He gave his disciples a clue about the Father in him and the Father, both in us and us in them. And that truth was conveyed in other stories, such as the vine and the branches. Somehow, standing outside looking at Jesus is not safe at all. But being in him and him in us, well, that's a whole nother story. We face what he faces, and he right there with us faces what we face, but with the power to change the story. So where is Jesus standing in our current story? We may be experiencing a multitude of feelings right now, but feelings don't change facts. For in him and with him right now are standing so many believers. They are the hands of those in Samaritan's purse in the midst of sickness and accusation in Central Park. They are the bodies still in close proximity, serving the families in the child welfare system. They are the mouths and the minds uttering the prayers that are ascending on behalf of millions, powered by the groans of the Holy Spirit. They are the pastors still stepping up behind the pulpits each of these last Sundays and speaking to empty pews, still the mouthpiece of the Lord. They are the hands of those that have written the checks to keep others afloat, the hands of teachers figuring out how to do this e-learning thing, fathers being strong and protective, and mothers rediscovering the joy of being at home while still pulling their hair out. All of those believers right in the midst of the current story in him. Will we take our place in him right now? Will we acknowledge him before men? Will we get our strength, our peace, our power, and joy from him? Or will we continue to sit by the fire until we end up weeping bitterly? After the resurrection, something changed. And we know what Peter couldn't have then. Peter moved from the fire to the beach, to the pulpit, and then back to a cross. And in doing so, he became a rock upon which the church was built. What changed? Christ in him, Christ in us, the hope of glory. If you're standing in the crowd away from Jesus this Resurrection Sunday, amidst one of the biggest crises of all time, take another look. I want to invite you to join the one who knows the future and the one who has the power to take you to places you've never dreamed. For where this lion walks, the story always changes.